Who are some of the most underrated shoegaze bands? If you clicked on this video, you probably know the big ones: My Bloody Valentine, Slowdive, Ride, Lush, Whir, blah blah blah. But today, we at Stained Glass Stories headquarters want to go deeper down the shoegaze iceberg. So we chose 6 bands that we think deserve way more attention. Alright, let's get into it. The first band we're going to talk about is sort of an honorable mention because they aren't on Spotify and we have no idea how many monthly listeners they have. But we feel like they are worth mentioning because they are rarely brought up in the shoegaze community. The Ecstasy of St. Theresa emerged from Prague in 1990 by multi-instrumentalist Jan P. Muschau. Their early 90s work, such as their debut EP Pigment, released in 1991, and Fluid Trance Centauri in 1993, sounds strikingly original. If anything, they can maybe be compared to the raw and surreal qualities that can be heard in My Bloody Valentine's Isn't Anything. Both their ethereal vocals and guitars float into space, creating a reverb-soaked and otherworldly feel. A year later, the Ecstasy of St. Theresa released Free D, marking the end of the band's original lineup, and Jan Muschau's interest shifted towards electronic and ambient textures, making their signature tone significantly trippier. Despite the band's sudden change, vocalist Katarina Winterova became a sudden presence in their later works. Her gentle yet haunting vocals added a touch of emotional depth to the band's evolving style. Like most shoegaze acts of the early 90s, their releases became less and less frequent by the end of the decade. However, the Ecstasy of St. Theresa remained extremely influential, not only in the Czech Republic, but in other European underground scenes as well. Their sound connects the dreamy melancholy of shoegaze with the experimental tone of electronica, crowning them as pioneers of Czech alternative music. Next on our list with 24,000 monthly listeners is the trippy duo Mintfield from Mexico City. They're the most recent artist on our list, but have already developed a solid catalog with an unmistakable sound. Formed in 2014, they began with Primeras Salidas, their first EP. Although it is now removed from streaming in Bandcamp, this release showcased their ambition and dynamic tone. They spin you between floaty, amorphous sounds to dark, almost gothic tones. This was just a warm-up round for them though, because in the coming years they honed their sound and came out with Pasar de las Luces, their full-length album in 2018. The breathy vocals and wailing guitars exist within such a large expanse, as the drums and bass groove close to the listener. This trademark mix of Mintfield is really solidified here and continues to develop in their most recent releases. While on the topic of Mintfield, I want to shout out a solo project from guitarist and vocalist Estrella del Sol. Called Figura de Cristo, she begins to explore a new world of textures. The classic, spacious sound of Mintfield is now inhabited by field recordings, dripping synths, and organic samples. It works really well with the soft, beckoning vocals. Mintfield carried these new tones into their latest release, Aprender a Ser. Japan currently has one of the most interesting scenes. Even though we already dedicated an entire video to exploring it, it didn't feel right to leave this list without including at least 1 or 2 Japanese bands. Oeil, with around 23,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, have long been beloved among shoegazers who are willing to dig a little deeper. But like many bands who aren't based in the UK or US, they're often left out of the broader discussions about the genre. Oeil was formed in Japan as the creative brainchild of singer Mitsuko Hoshino and guitarist and producer Takafumi Hibino. I'd say that it's pretty likely that if you love My Bloody Valentine, you'll love Oeil too. But what makes their sound feel so rich, organic, and unique in its own way is the incredible attention to detail. Every one of the many layers of instrumentation feels intentional, with Mitsuko's voice gently floating over everything. Because of that meticulous approach, Oeil's discography remains fairly small, consisting of only 2 EPs and a compilation featuring both old and new songs. By the way, I love both the name and cover art of their debut EP, Urban Twilight, because it perfectly captures the mood I get into when listening to it. It feels like driving down a Tokyo highway on a dark, cloudy day, surrounded by people lost in the motions of their daily life, yet somehow feeling isolated. Maybe that sounds a little depressing, but that's exactly what I love about Oeil. Their music has a way of making you reflective, even a bit nostalgic. It's like an ode to beautiful sadness. Moving our way down to 13,700 monthly listeners, we have the Veldt. I think the Veldt is one of those groups that was influential but never received the commercial success they deserved. A group that has been praised by some of the most well-known voices in alternative rock and R&B music. One of those your favorite band situations. Unlike most early shoegaze groups, the Veldt was formed in North Carolina by twin brothers Danny and Daniel Chavis. They would go on to perform with groups like Cocteau Twins, Oasis, and Pixies. The group has a one-of-a-kind sound that mixes shoegaze with elements of soul and dance music.
The stars shine pretty when there's loving.
Unlike most shoegaze groups, which feature vocals buried in the mix, the Veldt's vocals transcend the waves of sound. They are really full of passion and are unapologetically political. They're also the only group on this list that I've seen live at the Levitation Festival 2024, and they were amazing. There were like 5 guitarists on stage, and it created such a dense, ethereal sound that I'd never heard before at a live show. So why didn't the Veldt receive more recognition? They were screwed by their label. An entire album that was produced by Robin Guthrie was sidelined by Capitol Records. So the label stood in the way of just about every creative decision the Veldt made, whether it was their sound, artwork, or a European tour with Cocteau Twins. Eventually, they were dropped for being quote-unquote difficult. With Danny and Daniel being black musicians from the South, there's no doubt in my mind that the Veldt were held back by their labels for not fitting a certain stereotype of what black music should sound like. In recent years, the Veldt has received an increasing amount of recognition for inspiring groups like Block Party and TV on the radio. Even Don McKinney, producer of The Weeknd and Drake, has praised the Veldt. I was so interested in the story of the Veldt that I interviewed Danny to get his perspective. I've attached a link to the interview in the description box. I want to warn you all that I'm a fucking terrible interviewer, but I still think it's worth checking out. Coming in with 9,500 monthly listeners is Tokyo-based group Salon Music. When I saw their monthly listener count, I was genuinely surprised that it wasn't at least twice as high. I love these guys personally, and it's really sad that they haven't received wider recognition when you realize that they've released a dozen studio albums. So if you're looking for an underrated band to binge listen to, then here you go. They're kind of an anomaly on this list, not only for their prolific activity, but also their unique evolution. Salon Music started as a new wave group in the early 80s. Over the next decade and a half, their music became increasingly noisy and dense. By the time MASH was released in 1995, Salon Music completed their transition from new wave to noise. It's a collection of shoegaze tunes with a unique fusion of Shibuya K music. The result is gorgeously hypnotic and even danceable. Just listen to a track like Wanna Be Tied to know what I'm talking about. Even if the rest of the album sucked, this masterpiece of a song would still make it worth talking about. But it doesn't suck, and some other highlights in my opinion are Nagisa Night, yes, I know I probably pronounced that wrong, and Down Down. While the group would continue releasing albums until 2011, MASH was Salon Music at their noisiest. You will likely enjoy it if you're looking for something ethereal that encompasses multiple genres. The Stargazer Lilies, with roughly 5,000 listeners on Spotify, are one of the more recent bands on this list. The band was formed in the early 2010s by vocalist and bassist Kim Field and guitarist John Caperano, and was later joined by Tammy Hirata on drums. John and Kim had already been active for half a decade in the scene, having just left behind their previous project Soundpool, which we might have mentioned before on this channel. As unique as Soundpool were at the time, blending shoegaze with disco and alternative dance elements, they eventually grew out of that sound. Their new project, the Stargazer Lilies, completely moves away from the electronic-oriented sound of the 2000s and instead took a huge step back towards the previous century. Their new style drew heavily from the sounds and aesthetics of the psychedelic rock era of the 1960s, with influences from bands like Cream or the Jimi Hendrix Experience. They even went as far as using vintage guitars to create a more authentic retro sound, identifying themselves as a flower power trio. I think it's worth noting that both with Soundpool's electronic style, as well as later with the Stargazer Lilies' heavy focus on neo-psychedelia, they've consistently been among the pioneers in their own niche. While the band themselves never rejected the term shoegaze, it becomes pretty clear from interviews how eager they always were to expand the genre's boundaries and avoid being derivative, especially as the scene became increasingly oversaturated with shoegaze and dream pop bands following the genre's major revival in the early 2010s. They also emphasized that psychedelic elements had always been present in their early roots and evolution of shoegaze, tracing back to the famous Phil Spector wall of sound, even though these influences had faded a little over time. Luckily, unlike other bands on this list, the Stargazer Lilies are still actively touring and releasing music today, with their latest album, Love Petals, coming out just this year. So far, they have 6 studio albums and a live session album under their belt, and one can only hope to hear more from them in the future. At least until they decide to completely reinvent their sound once again. This list certainly shows that success in the industry does not equate to success as an artist. Whether it's the hypnotic sound of Mintfield or the strong values of the Veldt, the scene just wouldn't be the same without them. Sometimes the small artists are the ones who leave a big impact on our lives. So, do you resonate with our picks? What bands would you include? We're expecting some great recommendations in the comments section on this one, so don't be afraid to tap into the discussion. We might even do a follow-up. Stay dreamy, everyone.